Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us in our somewhat weekly Rock Dev events during the great pandemic of 2020. If I know all of you are here, but in case you couldn't make it in the future or couldn't make it to a past event, whether during the past couple months as we've been recording these on Zoom, or even from before that, we do have a YouTube page, and I will paste this in the chat. You subscribe to this. We have 13 whole subscribers right now. We have something like 1,100, 1,200 people on Meetup. So trying to get that a little bit higher. The link isn't exactly easy to see, but I will put a link to this on our Meetup page if it's not there already. Also in the chat here. We have topics, going from, as you can see, from JavaScript using Svelte to deploying Docker containers in Fargate, to doing feature flags with Elasticsearch and feature flags and Elasticsearch, and some more. So yeah, check that out. And with that, Dennis, are you ready to go?
Ready as I'm gonna be, sure.
All right. Well, thanks. We have Dennis Wheeler. I've worked with him for a bunch of years, over the years, different jobs. And he's been telling me about this Raspberry Pi setup for a long time. And now I finally got him to give a talk on it. So I'm glad all of you showed up, and maybe even more of you will rewatch this on YouTube later. So yeah, Dennis, you should be able to share your screen. I have checked that box in Zoom. Have at it.
All right, do people see a terminal?
I do.
Is the text big enough?
A little bit bigger. That'll do.
Okay. So George said we've worked together. Currently the infrastructure platform DevOps security team at VisualDx. And I've just been playing a lot with Raspberry Pis, especially since coronavirus has hit. So yeah, I'm going to show some of the things I have done to get my Raspberry Pi ready to do side projects and also be able to connect to it remotely safely. So one of the things I said when I created the meetup was, because it's a lot easier to record on Zoom when the stuff already exists, mine already has SSH set up. If you download from, well, let me just pull it up, Raspberry Pi, I think. Yeah, there's an imager for Raspberry Pi for most systems, or you can just get the image directly. I'm doing it on Raspbian Buster, the most recent Raspbian. I'm doing it technically on the light version, which has no UI, because mine's just going to be a random SSH head so I can run Docker and other boxes. There. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, that was a fun one.
Okay. How much did you guys miss?
I think only the last couple seconds.
Okay, cool. Anyways, so there's a couple ways to get SSH back. I'll show you one of them, but if you're somewhat savvy, if you mount the SD card for your Pi on Windows, Mac, Linux, anything, you can just put an empty SSH file right there, and it will just turn on SSH. Now I happen to know, come on, there we go. I did. Oh, yeah, I gotta go to Pi first. So the default user for Raspberry Pi is Pi is the user and Raspberry is the password. So this is the first time I'm doing it since I wiped the SD card yesterday. So this is a fresh box. SSH works. I did that other one myself. So let me show you guys the other way. If you plug in a monitor and you want to turn on SSH, if you do sudo raspi config, you can go to the network options, I think. Sorry, I screwed up. I thought it was there. Interface options, I apologize. Hit SSH and you can have it enable SSH, which was already done in my case, but that's fine. There's a couple other good things in the raspi config, which, let's see, localization, time zone, locale is actually a pretty important one. It starts most raspi images in the UK. So let's get that part at least switched over to the US. US UTF-8 I always like. And this is going to take a minute, but sure. Just one of the things that I typically get done because it fixes a lot of bugs you'll have if you're trying to transfer stuff between systems. There, already done. Nice and simple. You can also, if you're plugging directly in, there's keyboard layouts in there, there's time zones, bunch of fun stuff. If your system's not working the way you want, probably a good place to check out early on. Okay, so we have our locale, we have SSH set up. I'm going to set up an SSH key. I'm assuming some of you probably already know what the heck it is, but in case you don't, let's make one. This command I got from GitHub. If you just Google GitHub generate SSH key, it creates this. The TRSA is just a type of key. It's one of the more common ones. George, of course, if you ever talk to him about keys, we'll talk about ED25519. And the only reason I'm not doing that is my mobile phone and some old systems don't like it. So a RSA key is just fine. This -C here, or -B is bytes. 4096 is a very secure number of bytes for the SSH key. This -C is a comment. So it really doesn't affect anything. I could not put it in there, but I like to know which key it is because I do change mine somewhat regularly, so I usually put a date in it as well. So there's that. Generating a key, that's where keys normally go. I actually have a key already on my personal machine. So I'm going to just create it to a separate spot. I am going to add a password because I always do. So I have a key. It's on my local machine, and I want to get it over to the Raspberry, but I don't want to go to Pi. Okay, we'll come back to the key. Sorry, I jotted down notes quickly because I kind of set this up yesterday. So let me go back to the Pi. Of course, I got. Let me show you something. So there's a thing called an SSH config file, and it can save you from having to put in parameters. Like I keep forgetting to put in Pi instead of Dennis. I don't always want to type 192.168.221. So what I'm going to do is create a file here. Well, I'll show you something first. Most people only have regular config. This first line I have here will grab everything from a config.d directory just so I can have a bunch of files so I can easily keep them separate. Anyways, so because we're doing a nice test right here, I'm going to just call this test and host name 192.168.221. So I can just use the word test now and when I do SSH instead of typing out that whole thing, and the user will automatically go to Pi for me with this. So let's do that. So SSH test, yes. Raspberry, and I'm back in. Awesome. So that'll save some time because I'm going to keep screwing that up otherwise. So as it's brand new, I like to just get everything updated and upgraded. It doesn't take that long because I just got the image. I think I did it yesterday. Update will, keep forgetting apt. Update will regenerate all the cache of what can be updated. Upgrade will actually make the changes for you. So basically, I'm just getting the most up-to-date packages and set up for the whole system. And there's actually a third one I'm going to do. I don't do this one too often, but especially because I'm just starting out, I'm going to do it. There's one called dist-upgrade, and that will kind of get some packages that it normally doesn't do on a standard upgrade. They're a little more standardized. I'll check quick if there's any. Well, I'm not seeing an easy way that Zoom is coming back, so I'll just assume. All right, almost done. This upgrade I was talking about, it shouldn't be, I can't believe I keep forgetting apt. Shouldn't be significant. Nope, awesome. All right, so one of the first things is people look for standard items. And being it's a Raspberry Pi, everyone's going to assume the Pi is the normal user. So I'm going to add my own name. And I don't care about the password because I'm going to disable it. So now I have the user.
And you're doing that as a lightweight, like little security mechanism, right? You said that people are looking for defaults.
Yeah, I mean, it's security through obscurity, but every little piece helps. I mean,
Sure.
It's not going to stop anyone, really, but because especially if they know my name, they could just as easily look for it. All right, so that's the hash of my password. And the next thing I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm going to disable the password. That's what that just did as a command. And I'm pulling back up the hash. And if you look, the command literally just adds an exclamation point before the hash, so the hash no longer works. If you want, you can re-enable them with a U, unlock and lock, but I want this, so I have to use an SSH key to get in. SSH key is just kind of a secure way to say I am who I say I am. So, okay, I have the user Dennis, and it has no password that is usable. But before I actually go and use Dennis, right now Dennis can't do anything. So sudo allows you basically root permission or admin permission for someone who's not a standard Linux person. So I'm going to grant myself sudo permission. This is the record that is allowing Pi to do something. What it's saying is the user Pi can do anything, and for anything, it requires no password. As I'm not going to have a password, that's exactly what I want. So now my user should be able to do anything. Okay, it worked. Okay, so now I want to get that SSH key I created up here. Test.pub. So
It's probably worth mentioning that you might not. There might be use cases where you may not want to do that. There might be situations where following that step is not actually desirable. So just something to think about as you're moving through this, like where you don't want the Dennis user to do that. But keep going. You're doing great.
That's true. There is definitely cases you don't want full sudo access. I'm assuming this is a box that's going to be a personal project box. So I kind of figured you'd want permission, but you're absolutely right, Matt. So what I'm doing is there's a special place in SSH. Actually, I bet you that folder doesn't even exist right now. One sec. So the Dennis folder, we need a folder called .ssh. And that just will store our credentials. Now, what I was about to do is, so when I created the key, it asked me for a name, and I called it test ID RSA. And with that, it will also create a .pub, or the public key. It's asymmetric encryption, and basically, with the private key, I can do all the magical stuff, and the public key will allow the public to know that I am who I claim I am. So rsync is a way to move files over SSH between different computers, and I am going to move the public key onto the Raspberry Pi into a file called authorized keys. Oh. But I need a password to do it that way. Okay. I'll just move it to the Pi, and then I'll move it over. But of course, I didn't create that folder in the Pi. This is why I should have a much more thoroughly planned idea. I kind of have more footnotes, but you're seeing where I'm screwing pieces up, so that's fine. So let me get back into the Pi. Key to the right place. Already has 644. So now what I should be able to do don't know where this suddenly came from, but here's another line, identity file. That's telling it to use the SSH key I have, so I don't have to specify it. It has the IP, and it has the user. So now, when I do SSH test, I have to put in my password for the key, but I come right in as Dennis. Awesome. There are ways between Mac, Windows, Linux where you can save the password for your SSH key. I'm not going to because I created the key only for the purpose of this demo, and well, I think that it'll just go away. And I made a nice quick password, so it doesn't really matter. So anyways, that's up. I'm now here as Dennis. And just like I did for Dennis earlier, I am going to disable the password for Raspberry Pi, but I'm also going to disable the Pi. So what this one was set the user Raspberry Pi with an expire date of 1, and that's using Unix timestamp. So that means the user could no longer sign in as of the first second of January 1st, 1970, if I remember the date. So you can't get into Pi anymore. Just to show. All right. So Next thing I want to do is disable the ability to use password over SSH at all. I mean, right now the users don't have it. If I were to share this with someone, like, as Matt said, I don't always want to give everyone sudo. So if I were sharing this with someone who I wanted to have less privilege, they wouldn't have sudo, but they might have a password or something else. I personally, I mean, it's just generally better to not have the password. So I'm going to turn off passwords in general for SSH, because my root goal is to force the SSH key, which we already have, and one of the next pieces we're going to do is get two-factor authentication as well when I'm outside of my house. So I'm going to change the SSH config, and one thing that I highly recommend people do is whenever you're about to mess with a system file, make a copy of it. It just helps. Okay. Did I want regular SSH config? Let me see. Oh, I think I did. No. Okay, there we go. All right, so something is, I'm going to turn off the ability for root to log in directly completely. Let's see. Pub key authentication, it's by default on, but I like to make things explicit. Pub key is your public key via the SSH key that we created. Let's see. I want password authentication off. So just don't allow it. And permit empty passwords. It's just a security thing that doesn't really come up too much anymore, but again, I like being explicit. So I'm going to turn that off anyways. Restart SSH, and as pub key was already the only thing, you guys can't really see anything. So that's off. Now I'm going to install the Google Authenticator setup. I can paste some of these links if anyone wants after, including links where I got this information in the first place. I have some of those notes jotted down. It's just not easy for me to get to the chat window while I'm doing this because Zoom doesn't like me while I'm sharing. So anyways, now that that's hooked up, as my user, because I'm the one who wants to use Google Authenticator, I'll just run it. Do I want them to be time-based? Yes, that means every 30 seconds. I'm going to have to shrink this so I can actually scan it. Normally I wouldn't do this with a shared screen, but this whole server is getting wiped after this demo, so I guess I don't care if someone really steals this. So that'll store to my thing. Disallow multiple. Typically, so this question is basically, a new code will be generated by Google Authenticator. Sorry, let me take a half step back. Anyone who has time-based one-time passwords, Google Authenticator, 1Password, there's a handful of applications that can generate 6-digit codes for you. Google Authenticator is one of them, as it's free and open source. Or I think the server side is open source. I think the other side is closed source. Either way, it's free. It works well for me, so I use it. But it's on my Android. It's also got a free one for iPhone. So that is just what I'm going to use because I like two-factor authentication. So anyways, as I was going with this question, it restricts you to the password. The 6-digit password I just mentioned recycles every 30 seconds. If I say yes, which I typically would, once it's used, I have to wait the next 30 seconds. But in this case, because I'm probably going to be bouncing in and out of SSH, I'm just going to say no, because this is a demo. By default, times view. Normally I'd say no to this, or Normally I'd say yes to this, but I'll say no. Again, it's a demo. In case there's a time problem, I'll just let it go. Hardened by brute force. Again, normally I'd allow the rate limiting. I'm just saying no to everything because I am doing a demo. So, all right. Now, it's there, and I have it scanned into my phone, but I can't do anything with it yet. So, the next thing I got to do is set up in SSH where it tells it to use the Google Authenticator. And there's a thing called PAM. I believe it's pluggable authentication modules, or basically a way to add other authentication to SSH. So we're going to go over there. And just like I did for the main SSH config in etc ssh sshd config, this one I believe is actually SSH. Copy. Oh, SSHD again. So, so that is telling Pam to use Google Authenticator. And I am getting rid of the standard Unix authentication because otherwise it will prompt you multiple different ways. So it's switching it out instead of using both. All right. So that is Pam knowing how to do it, but now I need to tell SSH daemon or SSHD how to actually do something with it. I already have one working SSHD config, so I'll make another copy because you can always get rid of them later. The one I'm looking for this time, challenge response authentication. In the Google Authenticator, this is needed because it needs to be able to prompt me to add the 6-digit PIN. And we're actually going to add some stuff that's not in here. And again, I will post this stuff in a gist or something after the show. So what that says is things that are acceptable are Pam's keyboard interactive, or the thing's going to prompt me for my two-factor, and public key. And because there's a comma instead of a space, it actually says both are needed. So Pam has to agree with me, and I also have to have a working public key. If you want to lock things down a little further, only Dennis can SSH in. And Pi and root cannot. And something I just throw in because it adds a little bit of security is Protocol 2. It just forces you to use the newer version of SSH, so it's just safer that way. Restart SSH just to make sure it happens. And when you're doing something like this, the best way to test that that worked is to have a second window, because otherwise you can lock yourself out. So, boom, it is asking me for my authentication code.
Just a highlight. That's a really good tip. Don't, if you're making SSH config changes, don't leave your current session until you're sure you can get in.
Yep, I second that.
Can't highlight that one enough. Been there way too many times.
Yep. It's actually, I don't know if you're going to head into this later, Dennis, but I would actually recommend even making a snapshot of your Raspberry Pi at that stage, because you can lock yourself out in these type of sessions pretty quickly. And if you have one that you can revert back to, it'll help you immensely. I've done it. I've locked myself out more times than I can count.
It's a rite of passage as a sysadmin.
There you go.
I was not going to get into it, but that is a phenomenal idea. All right, so let's see. So now I have a machine that I can get into locally, and it needs my Google Authenticator key to do so. So that's part of it. The next thing is I'm behind a firewall. Nothing can come into my house. I can make a tunnel out and bring things in. So that's what I'm going to do. There is a nice little program called ngrok, which is what I'm going to use in this case. And I want, I believe, for the Raspberry Pi, copy. I believe I want Linux ARM because despite it actually technically being an ARM64, it runs like an ARM32. Let's not put it there. So wget is just grabbing the file for me. There you can see it in red. And because I did this yesterday, I know that there is no folders or anything in it. So I'm going to put it right in user local bin. And there it is, ngrok. So if I run ngrok, boom, it's working. Wonderful. So from here, let's actually log in. I'm going to reset my auth token anyways, so even though this is going online, that's not going to matter, and it's a free account. So this
I'll
is just
also edit that second out.
perfect. That is just giving my computer permission to use my ngrok account. Again, it's free. It doesn't matter. The sign up takes about as long as it took me to sign in. It's literally just put in a user, a password, and confirm that you really are you. And what ngrok is going to do for me, how I mentioned earlier that I have the firewall, nothing can come in unless I tunnel out, I will connect ngrok to a random place outside. It's ngrok itself, I mean, the application and their servers. And basically, it'll give me a place that can come into my machine. So, GCP22, I think. Okay, so what I just did is set it up. Okay, I'm going to shrink that. So on the left side, ngrok is running. We can get into further later if someone really wants, setting that up to just run auto magically, but I just wanted to kind of prove it as a proof of concept. So you guys already know I can SSH in directly to the local one. So what I'm going to do now, actually, I'll go here. So I was doing this yesterday, and the URLs, every time I've used ngrok, has always been the host name of 0.tcp.ngrok.io, but the port always changes. So another thing, kind of like changing your name from Pi, security through obscurity. It is not a great layer, but one of the most hit layers across any public endpoint in the world is 22. SSH standard port. So one of the things they do recommend is changing off of that. Again, I don't think it's great security, but it's a thing. We're not going to do this because the only one publicly available is going to be whatever is generated by ngrok, and it's not going to be 22. So in this case, what is over there on the left is 15510. So, oh yeah, because when I did this yesterday, so one thing ngrok or SSH does, this thing, the first time you connect to a server, each server has its own unique fingerprint. And what this giant warning I got up here was, was, hey, you called something this, and you're connecting to it again, and it has a different fingerprint. That's probably a problem. In this case, I know it's not, because I literally just wiped the memory card and did it again today. So it's actually a different server, but hey, that's how it goes. Oh.
Yeah, an easy way to explain that might be consider it preventing like a man-in-the-middle type of attack, like where the identity of a particular endpoint has been potentially compromised. So that warning came up because the man-in-the-middle did change. So really, Dennis is kind of attacking his own platform as a man-in-the-middle manipulator. But yeah, that's a good summary.
So now technically I am connecting through ngrok, and I am confused why it's asking me for my password. So I'm going to just type this out in case I screwed up the config. There we go. So now it's asking me for my code and my RSA key. Boom, I'm in, and I technically, as shown here, I went to the outside world and came back. So now, even though I'm behind a firewall, I went through the outside world to get in, so you can now connect from a gym, from your phone's random cell phone, which I've actually done more times than I thought I would while I'm at lunch. It usually comes up around George for some reason. So, now that's all well and good. But eventually, when connecting from home, you just get tired of adding in the two-factor authentication. So, last step of what I have planned is we're going to disable two-factor only when I'm coming from my home. And I'm not even doing it for everyone, I'm doing it for the devices that I've manually put. DHCP is a whole nother talk, but basically my network's set up so I know a certain address range is what I want. So, I'm going to tell it when things match this group, which is 192.168.2.0 through 192.168.3.255, which are the devices I consider safe. Earlier, we did authentication methods. Let me scroll up quickly. Oh, it was only right here. And we forced it to have the additional modules and public key. And now what I want is just public key. And for safety's sake, I still have the thing running on the left. So if I cut out and this is a problem, we'll know. So this is me going through ngrok. It still wants my two-factor authentication code, just like I was hoping. And now that is me connecting through my local address, and it did not ask for two-factor authentication. So that is what I wanted to get through. Any questions, comments, concerns, accusations?
So first, that is an absolutely killer demo, and that's the fastest I've ever seen anyone get through anything close to that. That was like a speed run of, that was awesome. Very nice job.
Well, I've done it 3 times now, so.
Yeah, when he says he put this together yesterday, it's like, I feel like the 3rd time you put it together was yesterday.
2nd was yesterday. This is the 3rd. But I took a lot of notes that is on the laptop sitting next to me. If I was just kind of puzzling through this, it probably would have been 3 hours.
Right. So I guess a summary, your goal was to be able to SSH into your home Raspberry Pi from anywhere in the world. Right.
And feel safe.
Right. And have it be safe. ngrok is a great tool for punching a hole from their SaaS offering to any server anywhere. You have hardened your Raspberry Pi by disallowing password auth, forcing SSH keys, and then enabling one-time password.
And while you don't have to, I did include a password on the public key as well, because
Sure, yeah.
most good SSH clients these days can save that for you. But if somehow someone gets that public key or the private key, they would need the password for that as well. So you need the file, you need the password for the file, and you need two-factor authentication to get in.
Yeah. So what do you use this Raspberry Pi for?
Good question.
I have
Maybe
a
not
bunch
this one
of
because you just
random-
said you're going to wipe it.
Well, I have one that's set up very similar to this. I bought a spare Pi just so I could do this without destroying my, I call it Pi Work, actually, is the host name for it. It runs Docker, and I have a script that pulls my financial data and correlates it for me so I know all my balances. I do some freelance work that is kept on there. Any project I feel like messing around with just kind of has its own Git repository or set of them.
So I want to ask kind of a follow-up on that, because there's a couple of ways that you could kind of position that Pi. Like you could keep it in your house and say, I'm only ever going to hook this up and I'm going to know the network position of it. Or I might be able to carry that thing out on the go, which is kind of that's an interesting project idea. And I don't know how many people are kind of in that space, but like the mobile Pi, being able to transport it around and kind of have your own on-the-go platform is something that can happen in the space as well. Now, there's like a big step up as far as danger goes there, right? But one of the questions I would have is, are you only ever accessing this with your Pi being on your home network, or are you Pi portable?
I only have it on my home network. I know George and I have chatted about the idea of bringing around a Raspberry Pi with an external battery and a tablet.
Yep.
But it's nothing we've done yet.
Yeah, I've done one of those. It's a lot of fun. And they make a Pi hat that actually will give you the ability to throw it on a cellular network. So like there's a lot of kind of crazy stuff you can do on that front that this will start to get into. So one of the things I would say is, if you do go this route, this is an incredible amount of security to apply in a short amount of time. What I would recommend you do is you take, and I threw a link to Etcher in this chat on the side. One of the things I would strongly recommend you do is, if you trust this security practice, snag an image of your Raspberry Pi and save it. Meaning that if something goes crazy wrong and you're kind of trusting a little bit of the security through obscurity principles when you save an image like this, but you can throw it back together real quick, kind of rip it down to a base image and spin that up quickly. So I think right now I have like maybe 40 Raspberry Pis in my house, and I basically do like a repeatable build effort where I can just take an image like this, build it on an SD card, and just plug it into a Raspberry Pi, or pop that Raspberry Pi's SD card out and throw it into another one if I kind of want to use the same thing in a different place. So that's one of the things I would say. The other thing I would say is, consider getting 2 Raspberry Pis and running Pi-hole in front of this. And I'm not sure we really want to go too far that route, but if you're familiar with Pi-hole, that will help add to your security practices ahead of pinging something like this directly. And I don't mean to step on, if you were going to head that route, Dennis, that's probably a good kind of next conversation.
I wasn't going to in this conversation. I actually have dual Pi holes sitting here. And as far as reproducibility, the Pi holes are doing my DNS and my DHCP here. And for reproducibility, I don't really store images so much, but I have created Ansible roles for just about all of this. But the demo just doesn't look nearly as cool if all I do is say, Ansible, do this, and it does it all, and it's done. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could use Cowsay, right? That would make it more interesting.
That's true.
Best thing with Ansible ever.
So the nice thing about doing that reproducibility pattern is, when you get into like deploying a bunch of these at your house, one of the questions you start asking is, and I don't know what platforms people are on, but if you're running Docker, can I run a Docker swarm? If you're running Kubernetes, can I run a Kubernetes pod? And you can get into this, like, I want to test out the smallest possible high availability practice in my house by deploying a bunch of services in this kind of network of Raspberry Pis. And it's this really cool kind of platform for trying out a bunch of services and having them be available across a whole bunch of different devices. And if you're getting into kind of the DevOps space, or if you're getting into, and I know a little bit about what some of the people on the call do, but if you're getting into kind of high availability architecture, it's a very easy, relatively low cost on-ramp that doesn't require you to spin up like a virtualization server or something like that to run a real heavy use case of Kubernetes or something similar.
Yeah. There's not enough time to really get into it, or at least I could describe it. One other fun thing that I actually did for my personal one, and I just could not compress the information fast enough, was my machine. I have it so every time the machine reboots and gets a new IP address, it automatically restarts ngrok. Ngrok, whenever you run it, runs a local little web server on port 4040. It hits that endpoint, finds out what the port is, because every time ngrok connects, it gets a new port, and it actually emails me. So even if I'm away, it lets me know what I can connect to.
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, or you could pay them money.
I could. And actually, I don't even need to pay them. I can sign into the ngrok website, and it just tells you what it's connected to. But as I already had to create the reconnecting ngrok, I just decided I wanted an email.
Yeah, if you pay them, I think you can get consistent URLs and ports and all of that. But
yeah,
for this, why? I guess unless you had a bunch of pies, right? Because you can only have one online process in a free tier.
Per email.
Sure.
Come on.
And you can always use the one as a jump gateway. So like you can SSH into the one and go to the rest, which is actually what I do sometimes.
That's a great use.
Yeah, that is true.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah,
I sort of have
one.
Yeah.
I got one.
Johannes from Germany. First of all, from Germany, we're going international with RockDev.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's right. The last step I couldn't really follow. So you were actually basically showcasing that you were able to connect to hit the one side of the tunnel going from the outside world back into your Raspberry Pi, and then with the same disconnecting from the SSH tunnel and connecting locally and without any connection material, just the public key, right? That's what it was.
Correct. So for local, it doesn't need the two-factor authentication, only when coming from the outside world.
Okay, got it.
And if you give him a little bit of time, Dennis will share his IP address and he'll let you test that.
It's 192.
Probably IP version 6. Sorry.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Well, I just set up my Raspberry Pi this week, and mostly today. And so is going through real VNC crazy insecure, like using their cloud option? I tried to test it with my phone to see if I could go in through the real VNC cloud option and connect to my computer from another network. I seem to be successful, but I haven't had a chance to get out from another network to be sure. So everything you did, Dennis, is like amazingly cool, and I get the drift. But I just wondered, is real VNC like just a crazy insecure option, or not as secure as what you did, obviously?
There's a pretty rich history of vulnerabilities in VNC over the years, many different flavors of VNC.
Okay.
something else you can do is using the ngrok if you want more of, because when I think VNC, and I could be wrong, I'm not strong in VNC, and the last time I used it was a decade ago. I did it because I wanted a visual connection, not SSH connection like I did here. So what you could do is using ngrok, you could set up a VPN or something, so you can just connect to your house that way if you have a firewall or something and you need to get out. I think OpenVPN has a branch that works with Raspberry Pi. WireGuard is another one that I've heard good things about and I haven't played with yet, that uses certifications and public keys, I believe, to connect. Just as alternate things to look into.
And WireGuard is now in the Linux kernel.
There you go.
I would say if you're extending your VPN like that, though, be careful.
Yes. You're muted, Ted.
Just to put it out there, as a Raspberry Pi newbie, I'd love to learn more about what Matt Harper is doing with his 40 Raspberry Pis.
Oh man, what a great segue to a question I asked him on LinkedIn the other day.
Yeah, it is a good segue.
I'm signing him up for sometime in June.
No, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll just give you kind of the teaser. So they're not all fully used, but what I basically do is when I'm building something kind of crazy in my house, which my house is pretty crazy, but I'll like turn pretty much everything I can into a home automation tool. So like I have some that are running as like almost like a function as a service type of cluster in my basement. And then I have some that are like hooked up to my thermostat or my doorbell or my garage door opener and stuff like that. And I would just say I'm probably considered like a little bit of a privacy nut. So like categorize me in that space. But that's kind of the stuff that I do in those areas. And by all means, like feel free to criticize as to whether I have actually leveraged all of the hardware that I have, because I guarantee I have not. But I've done kind of the building your own tablet, building your own phone, building your own like home compute stack off of Raspberry Pi stuff. And I mess around with a lot of them.
Great, thank you. I look forward to, would you say June, George?
I'm speaking for him when I pick June, but
He signed me up is the answer to that question.
yeah, we're scheduled through June 15th, I believe. So after that,
retro Pi build, Matt?
what was that?
No retro Pi build?
I don't have one yet, but sorry, I'm eating, but I don't have one yet, but it's on my, so my brother and I were actually going to pick it up as a project. And I've been having a hard time finding, I want to do it in an arcade cabinet. So I've been having a hard time finding an old arcade cabinet to plug something into.
I went the opposite direction and went smaller. So I actually found a Nintendo NES case for the Raspberry Pi. So I've got a little micro Nintendo arcade running RetroPie.
Brilliant. I mean, that sounds like kind of what Nintendo did with the emulator themselves, where they built that kind of micro format, and I love it. I think that those are great ideas. I love seeing stuff like that. Did you ever write up like what you did?
I didn't. I probably should.
Oh, I would love to read it. I love stuff like that.
It's a tricky area from a legal perspective because all the ROMs, of course, are not.
Oh, yeah, yeah, fair point.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think at our peak we had 25 people attend, so that was pretty good. That's fitting well within our random range of 10 to 30 people for one of these events. Next week, let's see here. Chris, we have GPA Hill, is that right?
GPA Hill.
Nice.
And
He's an agile coach, I believe.
Yeah, cool. I follow him on Twitter. That'll be good.
Nice.
He is unrestrained. That would be a good description of GPA. Sometimes
Do you
gets
remember-
him in trouble.
you remember what day that is? Is that Thursday?
It's Thursday, and I'm almost to the posting for it.
Nice. So sign up for the next event, meetup.com/rockdev. He is out of Rochester, or not in Rochester, so we'd love to get more people from out of town to give talks, and even more people out of town at, what is it, 2 a.m. now in Germany?
Yep. I could actually, shut off lights so you can see it's dark here. So anyway.
It's nice to see you again.
I mean,
Thank you. And I always remember when I'm using VI and use the R key to replace a character, I always remember you. So thank you for that sweet, keyboard thing.